Welcome to lesson 2 in the course called The Mind of a Woman. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to identify toxic females and what women fear. In the previous lesson, we discussed the ideal, what a godly woman should want as she embraces God's original design. She wants a companion. She wants a man to be able to invite her into a larger story. And she wants a man who can embrace his biblical masculine roles, particularly being a father and a husband. But as we've been saying, sin and the choices people make have obviously corrupted God's original design. And throughout your journey of trying to find a godly woman, it is true that you're going to be running into more women who don't love Christ, who aren't relationship material for a godly man, than you are going to be running into godly women who are ready for a good godly relationship. So you're going to need to possess the ability to know what red flags to look for. You want to know what's the ideal, but you also want to be realistic and know you're going to be needing to say no and not pursue a lot of women because of the issues that they're having and they're just not ready. Of course, you're never going to find a perfect woman, just like a woman's not going to find a perfect man. We all have issues, and the woman that God has for you, if he's called you to marriage, isn't going to be perfect in every single way, and they're going to be working on some of the fears we're talking about in this section. So by no means try to find this perfect person. So if you see someone with some of these issues, the real thing to see is if they're working on them, repenting of that sin, fighting the flesh, versus a woman who's just fully embracing these fears and the toxic solutions to these fears. So what do women fear most? From my understanding of what women have said and from what I've studied, obviously I can't speak from firsthand experience as men were looking from the outside in on this topic, but from what I've heard and studied, the word abandonment is a good word to generalize the fears that most women have. Not every woman would say it with that word abandonment. So here's a few examples of how some women would describe this underlying fear. I'm afraid of never meeting a man who loves me and of being alone. I'm afraid of falling in love and then the man leaving me. I'm afraid no man will ever love me. I'm afraid I will love a man and then do something to ruin it. Another way to describe this fear that women have is with the question, am I beautiful? That's the question women are asking themselves, and then hopefully they're trying to find ways to validate that question in good ways through the relationship with the father and even through their relationship with their earthly dads when they're younger. But that's the question that often drives unhealthy behavior. Am I beautiful? And they go to men to get that question answered. And usually those men are sinful, and the woman tries to do what these sinful men want, and they're trying to say, I am beautiful, by offering themselves sexually to men or by putting up with bad relationships so that they can get validated through the guys. And on the flip side, the men are asking a question, am I strong? And they're trying to go to women in unhealthy ways to say, hey, if I can win this beautiful woman, that means I'm a strong man. And then women are saying, well, if I can find a strong man who loves me, then that must mean I'm beautiful. And for more on these topics, you might want to read the book by John Eldredge, 2 books. The first one's called Captivating. That's written by him and his wife, John and Stacy Eldredge. And the other book's called Wild at Heart, which talks about the man's heart. And that's just by John Eldredge. And those 2 concepts of am I beautiful and am I strong are really discussed thoroughly in those books. But that said, here are 7 common ways that women try to deal with this fear in unhealthy ways. So this is what you really want to look out for when you're getting to know a woman. Number 1, a woman fears being oppressed by a man. So a toxic woman will try to control and oppress a man so that she can't get hurt by an oppressive man. After Adam and Eve sinned, God said to Eve in Genesis 3:16, your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. Unhealthy women are overly controlling. They fear being controlled by a man, and they respond to this by being overly controlling themselves. Unhealthy men are also overly controlling, thus, there is a power struggle between sinful men and women. Only through the gospel can there be peace between the sexes, restoring the unity and compatibility God designed for relationships. In sin, we choose unhealthy solutions. Since men fear being controlled by a woman, which will make them feel like a weak failure, they often respond by being dominant males who want to conquer females. And since women fear being dominated by a man, they too seek ways to control men. One layer that really complicates this for the woman's side is that in a healthy relationship, she's called to submit to her husband. And that's a really vulnerable thing to do, especially when your husband is a jerk or is misusing his authority. And that's why a woman should be highly selective, because she has to take on the vulnerable role of being submissive to her husband. So some women try to solve this fear of having to submit to a oppressive man by being oppressive and controlling themselves, like, I'll get you before you get me. Where the real solution a healthy woman should be taking is to say, I'm going to be a godly woman who submits to her husband one day, but I'm also going to require my husband to live into the fulfillment of his role that God has designed for him. Not saying that she requires and makes him do it, but rather she's not willing to compromise on her standards when choosing a man. She should be selective and say, I'm only going to marry a man who's going to treat me like Christ treats the church. In theory, obviously we're all sinful, but that's going to be the man's ideal because she's committed to being a submissive wife. So she knows the importance of finding a man who's not going to abuse that place. In the end, the solution for both men and women is to embrace their new identity in Christ, and so that they can properly handle these fears and thus love each other as God originally designed. We have to be reunited through the gospel, and you want to find a woman who's embraced that, who can look to the gospel, be a transformed woman, and who's ready to go back to what God originally designed for a husband and wife. Notice what Jesus said about leadership in Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45. You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So if you want a woman to submit to you in marriage, you need to die for her in marriage, like it says Christ did for the church. Obviously, I'm speaking figuratively here. If you're a loser who is rude and selfish, why would a woman want to submit to you in marriage? But if you're a winner who's loving and selfless, why wouldn't a woman want to submit to you in marriage? Toxic women refuse to be loved by godly men and then instead seek to dominate men like sinful men try to dominate women. If a woman can't understand how love and submission go together, avoid her. You won't have a godly relationship with her. Number 2, women fear not getting what they desire in a relationship. Thus, toxic women have learned how to weaponize their beauty to manipulate men. While it's certainly true, sinful men objectify women's bodies and just turn sexuality into an object to be pursued, it's also true that worldly women are allowing themselves to be objects as a way of manipulating the men to get to do what they want them to do. Now, I'm not saying it's not a man's fault when he sexualizes and lusts after a woman, and some women aren't doing anything to, tempt a man to do that. And even if she is, it's still the man's job not to lust after her. But there are plenty of godless women who know exactly what they're doing, and they know how to use their bodies as a way of manipulating and controlling men. They know that a man is visually stimulated, so they really lean into this evil thing that's talked about in Proverbs 31 verse 30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Some women reason, if I can get a man to do what I want, then I must be beautiful. Her fear of not being beautiful gets twisted into an evil desire to prove that she is beautiful by controlling men and breaking their hearts. Notice what 1 Peter 3 1 through 6 states. Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even as some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Notice how Peter emphasizes beauty when talking to wives. Many people misinterpret this passage and think Peter's telling women not to be externally beautiful, but that's not what he said. Peter is actually telling women how to rightly adorn themselves. To adorn means to beautify. Peter said women should try not to beautify themselves through worldly means. Rather, their external beauty should be an overflow of their internal beauty. Women can still wear jewelry, dress nice, and braid their hair, but they should not be doing these things to make themselves beautiful. Rather, they should only do these things as a way of expressing the inner beauty they possess because of Christ in them. So in summary of this point, godless, worldly women have learned how to weaponize their sexual beauty and their physical appearance to control men, whereas a godly woman has learned how to have an internal beauty that then is expressed through her external beauty through the grace that God has given her. Number 3, women fear loving a man who does not love them back. So toxic women often avoid relationships and run from commitment. Typically, it's the men who are being accused of trying to find a woman and then run to another woman once they win her. And usually toxic worldly guys are doing this once they can finally sleep with a woman. They pursue her, they have sex with her, and then they leave her. And while there certainly are some women who follow that pattern, mostly when women are doing this type of thing, they are playing on the emotional side of things. Once they get a man to fall in love, not literally true love, but they get him to be infatuated enough, then they just run away because they don't actually want a full relationship. They just want that quick hit of feeling loved by that man, and then they run away and are afraid of commitment in a real relationship because they're afraid of getting hurt. And then there are other women who don't dabble in the emotions and they just really try to avoid men altogether and run away no matter how much you pursue them, no matter how much you show them that you're safe. They have all these types of internal issues and fears that you're never going to be able to overcome. No matter how trustworthy you show yourself, they're always going to avoid that commitment with you. So when you find a godly woman, she's going to be able to get to that place where she's vulnerable enough to commit with you. Obviously, this is a vulnerable thing for women to do, so you should give them time, but eventually she has to get there with you and risk something with you. Otherwise, you're just wasting your time. Number 4, a woman fears being alone. Therefore, many toxic women use men to emotionally connect with in friendship until they find a guy they're actually going to commit to in romance. Generally speaking, if a guy and a woman are close friends, typically what that means is someone in the relationship likes the other person as more than a friend, but they're willing to settle for friendship because they know they can't have more than that. And then the other person may just want friendship or knows the other person likes them but doesn't want more, so they just are willing to let that person be led on. And while I do know that both men and women do this type of thing, in my personal experience and observations, I've seen more women doing this in the friendship sphere than men doing that. So as a guy, you need to be careful that you're not getting strung along by a woman who's just using you emotionally for the time being because she hasn't yet found the guy that she's actually romantically interested in. Again, as we talked about in the last point, Whereas men are sinful, godless men who aren't repenting of sin. They're just after sex usually. When you put this in the female perspective and she's a godless woman who's not repenting and she's not seeking Christ, what she's not after sex like a man is, what she's after is that emotional connection that makes her feel filled up and wanted and like she has somebody. But she's going to use a man differently than a man's going to use a woman. She's going to use him emotionally. And so she kind of keeps him in the friend zone, basically wanting all the benefits from this guy like he's her boyfriend, but she's not willing to give any of the benefits of being a girlfriend. And I'm certainly not talking about sexual benefits because I believe all sexual activity should only take place in the context of marriage. But she's not going to offer that commitment and exclusivity that a girlfriend should be offering her boyfriend. She's going to want all this emotional energy from you, but she's not going to give you other things that she should be giving you as a girlfriend. Again, just wanting the boyfriend benefits without the girlfriend commitment. And she's going to keep you in that friend zone until she finds a guy that she has an emotional connection with like she does with you, but who she also wants in a romantic way. So as a man, it's best just to don't play this friendship game. Let's all be honest here. You're not looking for a best friend that's a girl. You're looking for a wife. And you might think you're going to one day win her through being her friend long enough, but realistically, what you're probably doing is just losing more and more respect from her because she sees that you're willing to degrade yourself to be in her presence without her actually having to give you anything to be in your life. So as the guy who's just willing to take what he can get and be her friend, even though she knows you like him as more than a friend, you're losing respect. She's not going to value you and see you as a guy that can actually lead her because you're willing to settle for whatever she's giving you, throwing the crumbs to you. You're not that strong man who has respect for himself and is going to move on when he knows this girl's just using him emotionally. So what I would recommend you do is just be honest and say, listen, I really like you. If you want to date, I'd be happy to see where this goes and, we could go into a dating relationship, but I don't feel like you're looking at me that way and I'm not really looking for a best friend, so I'm going to go my separate ways. You don't have to be enemies with this girl. I'm not saying that, but avoid being close friends with a woman that you want to be more than friends with. By you moving on, you actually have a better chance of being with her anyway because she might see you as someone more than just a friend. But big picture, you should move on for genuine reasons because you don't want to waste your life in the friend zone hoping to have some woman that's just not interested in you in that way. God has a woman out there for you if he's called you to marriage who's going to want you like you want her. Number 5, women fear not being taken care of by their husbands. Thus, toxic women practice hypergamy. Hypergamy is the action of marrying or forming a sexual relationship with a person of a superior sociological or educational background. Studies have shown that men are far more likely to date or marry a woman who is less educated or makes less money than it is for a woman to marry a man who's less educated or makes less money. Now, for reasons we've talked about in the previous lesson, some of this makes sense and it's not all bad. A woman knows she's going to eventually be in a vulnerable place if she decides to have children with this man in marriage one day. Therefore, let's not pretend it's wrong for her to gauge a man's willingness to be a provider. We don't want to, act like there's no risk there for a woman. Obviously, however, toxic women who are in the world have taken this too far and they get into the gold digger category. They're just looking at a man as a meal ticket and a paycheck. And that's certainly, obviously, not something a woman should be doing who's following the Lord. Now, it can be flattering as a man to have a woman, a beautiful woman, seem to really like you, but remember that why a woman likes you is extremely important. A lot of guys just get blinded because they don't ever get that attention from a woman, and then they finally meet this lady who's really interested in them. But if she just sees you as a meal ticket and sees you as a status symbol, then this is going to be a toxic relationship. Don't get blinded by, her physical beauty and your sexual fantasies. Now, again, as I talked about in the previous lesson, there's a lot of guys out there who are complaining about this hypergamy and whining about it. And some of it's valid if, it's a feminist, toxic, user thing where she's just trying to use you. But again, don't be that type of guy who's being lazy, not fulfilling all that he could fulfill, and trying to usurp his role and get out from his role as provider, and, accusing all the women out there for being mean and don't liking men like him, where you're out of shape, you're living with your mom, you're addicted to video games, you have a crappy job or maybe not even a job. If that's you, if you're that type of guy complaining about women, there's a reason women aren't attracted to you. Is because you're complaining about them. Like, there's no bigger turnoff than a guy sitting around complaining about how great he is and how no woman can see it. So don't be that guy. Look at yourself in the mirror first before you start pointing the finger and claiming all women are evil. Do better, get yourself together, and then watch out for those women who are truly just being sinful in hypergamy and just looking for the gold digger type of woman, versus real women who are assessing men as men and expecting them to act like men. Number 6, women often fear the opinions of others. Thus, toxic women have swallowed the lies of feminists that value career over being a mother and a wife. Everyone wants to be approved by their peers. I'm not saying that just women struggle with wanting, positive opinions from other people. Men certainly struggle with that as well. But I do think that women typically care more about their peers' opinions of them than men do. And that's why many women have fallen into the feminist trap of erasing the need for men in their life. Now, when I talk negatively about the feminist movement, please understand that the old type of feminist did accomplish some good things. As Christian men, obviously, we want women to be treated fairly. We want women to have equal opportunity. We obviously celebrate women being able to vote. I mean, when we are against the feminist agenda, we're talking about that toxic feminist agenda that's gone too far. And really the best way to describe it is they don't just try to advocate for the rights of women, which is good. They're actually hating men. And that's what you need to be worried about and aware of, that a woman hasn't swallowed that feminist agenda where it's really about hating men. For example, when it comes to the issue of abortion. So abortion is disgusting, and as Christian men, we hate it because we value life and we value children and we value what that does to women. We want women to have a better option than killing a baby and committing murder. But the reason women have gotten sucked into believing this lie is because of the problem created in a woman's life because of deadbeat men. Right? There's a real issue there for a single mother who has to deal with raising a single child, and a man isn't literally bearing the child, and it's easier for him to disappear than it is for the mom to disappear and not have responsibility. That's a real issue that we as men should be concerned about. But the feminist agenda comes up with this disgusting solution from hell called abortion and traps women by giving them an option to erase the need for men. Oh, you don't want to deal with a child and you don't want to have to deal with a husband or a father in that child's life? Just erase the child. And so that's what feminists are doing. It's not just that they care about women, it's that they hate men and want to erase the need for men. So same thing occurs with a career. You want to understand, why does a woman want a career? Does she have real passion for this field, and does she have a desire to thrive for a good, healthy, biblical reason? There's nothing wrong with a woman wanting a career, and that can be a positive for her. But if she wants a career because she's trying to take the places of a man, and so that she doesn't ever need a husband and doesn't feel like she ever can be dependent on a man, that's the type of woman you really want to avoid. So I'm not saying that you should see a woman's career as a red flag, What I am saying is that you should see a woman's career as a red flag if they're willing to put their career above their family, if they're willing to put their career above their husband and above their children. And the reason that's slightly different for men is because a man's job, his career, is directly connected to his ability to serve his family. Someone's got to be able to take care of the children. We don't need two dads providing. What we need is we need a dad providing, and we need a mom who's taking care of the children and the home when, those early years need that direct caretaker all the time. And so as a man, be careful of that woman who's not willing to fulfill that role that only she can fulfill. She should expect you to be a good provider, but you should also expect her to be a good mother and wife. So all that to say, if a woman wants these things because she's following the cultural lies that she doesn't need a man and she doesn't want a man, and so she's got to swallow all these toxic feminist solutions, that's not the type of woman you want to end up with. Rather, you want the type of woman, if she has career goals, great. If she has some aspirations, great. But more than that, she's going to put her role as a mother and as a wife above her career goals. And number 7, a woman fears not being emotionally connected to her husband. Therefore, toxic women often overvalue external, extroverted traits that aren't really essential for a biblical man's character. While men often get addicted to porn and then have this idolized version of a woman and want her to, fulfill these unrealistic expectations in the bedroom, women do the same type of thing, but it comes in the form of romance novels and romantic comedies, and they see these guys on screen and they want us guys to be these perfect witty men who have all these extroverted traits. And obviously there's, just as you want a physically beautiful woman, yeah, it's not bad for her to want a guy who knows how to communicate and connect with her emotionally. I'm not saying that's wrong, but obviously there's a line, and there's a just as a man can overvalue a woman's physical beauty, so too can a woman overvalue a man's ability to emotionally connect with her. And so a toxic woman or just an immature woman starts valuing what I call traits and skills and talents rather than actual character. So a lot of women get mesmerized by the worship leader, right? Because he can express himself through song and is very expressive. Or there's this one guy at church who's very well spoken and emotional and can talk and all this. But really he's just a player because he knows how to say and do and share, but he doesn't have that biblical character that's needed to be a good husband or father one day. And these types of women are wanting to be mesmerized by that guy. They're just as men can look for a perfect woman who's not real, so too these women look for perfect men, and the only men who are actually perfect are the guys who are players because they're projecting like they're perfect. Whereas a real man's going to be honest and not try to be everything a woman wants in this sinful, idolized way. He's going to know, I can't be that type of guy. I'm not an actor. I'm not a singer. I'm not going to be a person in a play. I'm not that type of guy. And a woman who's toxic is going to need that. She's going to need a guy who's this fake version that's just not real men. Men just are typically not very expressive. And she's going to be overly mesmerized by talent and skills, and she's going to be undervaluing character and work ethic. But a godly woman's going to be repulsed by the player who portrays himself as this perfect guy who never has any issues and it says all the right things all the time, because a godly, mature woman's going to know that that's a fantasy. And she's going to be her radar is going to go off when this guy is just constantly trying to project himself as that perfect guy. And she's going to be much more attracted to the guy who has biblical character, who's not worried about his physical appearance so much and is worried about, social media and how he looks and the way women view him, whereas he's going to be focused on developing character, work ethic, being a good provider, being a good protector, growing in his spiritual development so he can actually lead a wife and family one day. So all that to say, be a real man. We tend to gravitate towards the people who are like us. And if you're looking for a genuine woman who has biblical character and isn't playing games, you need to be that type of man who has biblical character and isn't playing games, because you guys are going to be able to find each other in a crowd. There's something about being genuine and truthful that causes you to be able to pick up on people who aren't being genuine and truthful and who are. And if you want that type of woman who's the real deal, then you got to be that type of man who's the real deal. So how can you find this type of woman we're talking about? And how can you say and do the right things to pursue her and attract her and, God willing, get into a relationship with her? Those are the things we're going to talk about in lesson 3.